Hey, this is Woody from Bastille, and you're listening to the StageLeft Podcast.
Okay, welcome to the StageLeft Podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young musicians entering an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of some of the unsung heroes behind the success. So go to the StageLeftPodcast.com for all episodes featuring members of Radiohead, Queen, Jungle, Earth, Wind and Fire, Guns N' Roses, Fleetwood Mac, the 1975, Madness, Oasis, the Zootons, the Prodigy and Kraftwerk, who discuss their writing, recording and performing processes, as well as reflective interviews with musicians and producers who worked in the studio and on stage with the Beatles, Beyonce, Elvis and David Bowie. Today we are joined by a musician and composer and Oscar shortlisted songwriter Erran Baron Cohen, who, as well as being signed to Miles Copeland's label with his band Zohar, has been a key collaborator when writing scores for the likes of Borat, Ali G, Bruno, Who is America, the wonderful StageLeft Flats, and co-writer of the Infidel musical with David Baddiel. Today we'll be discussing how one goes about writing a song that you know that Elton John, Sting, Bono, Chris Martin and Snoop Dogg will be playing on, completely and deliberately mashing up Jarvis Cocker's attempt to sing Help the Aged on the Ali G show, the Wuhan flu song, the benefits of being a self-taught musician versus the drawbacks, and lots more. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest today on the StageLeft Podcast is none other than Erran Baron Cohen. Thanks for joining us today, Erran. How's it going?
Very good. Very nice introduction, Chris. Thanks. That sounds good so far.
Yeah, good stuff. Now, I believe you taught yourself piano, right? Many moons ago, and also you then went on to play the trumpet as well. What advantages do you think that approach had as a young musician, as an 8-year-old, I think you were at the time, to teaching yourself piano from then going on? I think you did a music degree later. So, what do you think the advantages were, and what were the disadvantages?
Yes, good question. Just to be clear, I did actually have a teacher when I was about 8 or 7. I can't remember, but I was probably getting bored doing scales, and she walked out one day, I think, after a couple of lessons. So then I didn't have a teacher. And then I basically, as you said, taught myself. But at the same time, very soon after that, I started playing trumpet as well. And I did have a teacher who didn't walk out. And so I'm sort of a hybrid, because on one side I taught myself piano by ear, and on the other side I was playing trumpet, and from quite a young age I was in orchestras and quite classical, but I had a very, as we'll get into, a very wide range of influences. So the advantage of teaching myself was it was cheaper than getting a teacher for my parents. But more than that, what I was doing was I was listening to songs on the radio that I liked, and I tried to work out chords. And sort of, it probably was quite painful in the beginning, but I've started to get good at hearing things, being able to play it, just using my ears, and anything I liked, I try to just transcribe by ear. And I think that training was great, to be honest, and important, because it's something I can do quite easily now. And you don't get to do that if you're just learning scales classically. I mean, that should be a part of it, really.
If you think if your teacher hadn't walked out at that stage, what do you think you'd be able to do now that you might not have been able to do if that hadn't have happened? Or do you feel that you've kind of caught up in a different way?
Well, yes, I think having a classical teacher probably would have put me into I would have been playing a lot more classical pieces and sight reading and all that kind of stuff, which I'm not very good at because I never do it. I would have been better at that. I don't really need to use those things in what I do now. So it's an interesting question. I think as a musician, I think having this combination that I've had of having taught myself piano, done a lot of stuff by ear, listening to things and sort of absorbing it, and then at the same time playing trumpet classically, and also in orchestras, which was a very important thing. Just having both those things together, I think, has made me I hope, a more rounded musician than maybe it would have just been if it would have just focused on, traditional learning, just with a teacher.
Interesting. One thing I'm particularly interested in. So I was just mentioning this to Erin before we started recording. So by the time people listen to this recording, I would have just become a father for the second time. So my partner's about to drop, and I'm going to edit this.
Top for that.
Thank you. And one question I really have, which is interesting, I think it's probably every parent's dream that they have their kids go on to make a living doing something creative as a full-time living.
Or every parent's nightmare as well.
Right, exactly right. So what do you think they did as parents that enabled that to end up being a ripple effect?
Yes. Well, actually, I've got 4 boys myself, one of whom, well, actually, 2 of them seem to be going into an art direction. And I say slightly worryingly, but they're both great at what they do. One's actually a great musician as well. My son Jonah. But so what did my parents do? I think they encouraged, they're not musicians, but they loved hearing music. And once I was able to bang out tunes that were sort of passable, so that they weren't paying people to listen to, I think they enjoyed hearing me play. And we used to have, I'm Jewish, and we used to have Friday nights at my house. And part of the Friday night was sort of a bit of a performance where I would play something and maybe sing a song, so there was a sort of a bit of a performance aspect in my house that my parents encouraged. That also probably affected my brother as well. And I was kind of the house entertainer where if I played, then I could get some food. So that was kind of the deal for many years. So it was and they paid for my teaching. Obviously, I was taught as a kid, so that cost money. So they supported me that way. But they weren't pushy parents. So you have to practice. It was up to me to do that. And it's like I said, I didn't have a piano teacher, but I just wanted to play piano and work out things I'd heard and see if I could play them. And that was just myself, I suppose. So in a way, I think it's a balance between, you can push things, you can also put people off, but it depends on every kid is different, obviously, and responds in a different way.
So they gave you a certain amount of agency over it. Did you sense that they wanted you to go into the music industry or not to go into the music industry? And were they doing things like suggesting you should do a backup career or anything like that? Because a lot of our young listeners are in those shoes right now, where they want to pursue their creativity, but there's a cost of living crisis, and parents are kind of a bit worried about that, understandably. How did it transpire that both of you end up making a living out of the arts?
Well, it's sort of it is quite a worrying way to go, because, as you said, we don't go into this kind of stuff because we want to earn money. We do it because we have to, and because we love and we're obsessed by what we're doing. And we do a lot of stuff that makes hardly any money or even no money, and it's just a project and we have to do it, And I think if you've got it in you, you have to pursue it. That's the only way you know whether it will work. Now, to the other side of that is, how do you earn a living from it? And that's not easy. And I think you have to be open to, you can have a dream and you may have your dream that you want to go in a certain direction, but actually quite often things happen in different ways that you didn't expect. And if you can be open to as many different avenues as possible and be ready to do something that you may not have expected, that could lead to a whole different thing that ends up being your main career that you actually earn some money from. So I think I think you just have, especially in doing music or anything in the arts, you have to be as versatile as possible, and then you hope for the best.
Yeah, that's such a good answer. That's such good advice. What about the Fairlight CMI? So I believe when you were at university, there was a Fairlight there, and that was something that you were particularly interested in. I might be right. Is that right? It was something that was piqued your interest, and it was quite a rare opportunity to be able to play one.
Yes, so I got into synthesizers and electronic music quite young. I think when I was 13, I saved up and bought my first Moog synthesizer Moog Rose, which was their little 2 oscillator, which I've still got, and it still sounds amazing, actually.
Wow.
And basically, I've got into craft work and some lot of German synthesis people like Klaus Schulze and Tangerine Dream.
Nice.
They were sort of, they're definite, Jean-Michel Jarre was a big influence as well. And so I was always interested in electronic music. I used to buy Sound on Sound magazine and read it every month, and was quite interested in all that stuff. So when I was at Goldsmiths, which was a great university for art and for drum and for music, and they did have a studio there that actually did have a Fairlight in it, but it was pretty hard to get onto. I think it was for the tutors and the maybe people doing master degrees that they were allowed to. So I don't think I actually was allowed to even touch it during my time there, which in a way was interesting, because by the time I got there was which is going back a long way, we had the Atari computer, which was I think it had 2 megabyte of RAM on it, but that was a big deal. It had a MIDI connection, so you could connect a synthesizer and with MIDI create a whole track. That was probably ended up, the Fairlight was really and then I had a Akai sampler, so I might have had a more powerful setup about the same time anyway. Than that. In a way, it was already out of date by the time I looked at it. At the time, it was a legendary bit of gear when it came out.
Who was a mentor to you if you didn't have a particular teacher per se, that maybe doesn't even know that they kind of mentored you? It could be kind of someone you never even met, but where, that almost deserves a bit of credit, if you like, for where you ended up.
Wow. Good question. I haven't really thought about. I mean, certainly, I think there's quite a few different things that were influential. I think one of the things was, as I said, when I was about 10, when I started to play trumpet, or 11, and I could sort of hold a tune on the trumpet. I went to the local youth sort of orchestra, and because there wasn't many trumpet players, I was put in the senior one quite quickly. And there was a conductor there called Roy Budden, who I remember, who was a brilliant guy, just very enthusiastic. And the orchestra was amazingly good for a sort of youth orchestra. And I think just sitting in there and listening to it and being part of that was a really formative experience. And then I had great trumpet teachers. I had a guy called Crispian Steele Perkins was my trumpet teacher at the Guildhall. And he was a great teacher. And with jazz, there was a guy called Ian Carr, who it was a great jazz trumpet player, also educator. He taught a lot of the main jazz musicians in the country, a lot of people in the Jazz Warriors, and people like Julian Joseph and people like that. And a lot of the main jazz guys went through his. He used to teach in a place called the Weekends Arts College, which is still around. And it was a bit like sort of a dance. It had great dance music and theatre, drama, and it was a great place on the weekend to sort of, a lot of creative people came out of there. So I think those were all important. And then I should maybe say my mother, but maybe not. That's a whole other story. We won't get into that now.
Okay, that's fine. That's really interesting, because sometimes I think we do get mentored by people and they never get kind of not credited, but they don't even know it actually happened. I think it's kind of nice for kind of to loop that back around.
Yeah.
How was Miles Copeland III? So we had Miles Copeland III on the podcast a couple of years ago, and wow, what a character. Very, very interesting interview. Yeah. And so your band Zohar, which I listened to earlier, by the way, there's the drum sound that you achieve on that first record is unbelievable. It's so good. Particularly that Midnight at the Bazaar song, I think it's called. Like, the drum sounds absolutely amazing on that. So Miles Copeland III signed you to his label. How was that experience? And I wonder, for listeners who aren't aware, what is the dynamic thereafter once you've signed between the record label owner and yourself as the artist? What involvement do they have or not have?
As you said, Miles is a great kind of legendary music industry character. He's definitely an interesting guy. I'll have to check out that podcast with him talking, because I'd like to hear it. So he's an interesting character because his dad was his original label, I think, was called CIA. His dad was in the CIA or something in Lebanon. He grew up in Lebanon at some point and different Arab countries, and he had this Sting. He was managing Sting at the time, and Sting did this track Golden Rose or something. Desert Rose. Which had this Arabic influence, and he was very into this whole idea of bringing the Arab Middle Eastern sound into pop music and into just a greater recognition, because it's great music. And my band Zohar, which kind of fused electronic music with Middle Eastern, Jewish, Arabic. Actually, should be the peace process, really. Sounds. I was sort of seeing, I was using samples of Jewish, a lot of spiritual singers as well, like muezzins and Jewish cantors, mixing it together into this. I was very careful not to make it into a soup, which is something that can happen, but to actually preserve the immense soulfulness of the singing and then create a whole tapestry around that. That's what I was doing with my band Zohar. And
what was his involvement once he signed you, which is amazing. I can totally see from the conversation I had why he would sign you, given what he said about those kind of merging those influences. What then? So how often are you in contact with him? Is it a hands-off thing? Because he was quite involved in Sting's process. He was quite hands-on with some of the stuff he did with Sting and came up with lots of ideas in the studio and stuff like that. Was that similar with you, or was it more hands-off?
Well, they had a label here, and we were more in contact with them here. He was obviously based in LA. Saw him a couple of times in LA, and we also, at the time, he used to run these yearly writing workshops. He had owned a castle or a chateau in the south of France, and he would invite a load of writers, singers, different artists to be there for a week. And every day you wake up and he put you together in a team of 3 or 2, and you write a song and record it in the same day and then play it over dinner, as that was the plan anyway. And so I went there twice, and that was a great experience. And I think he was quite involved. Certainly, he had, in signing us, he had this interest. He pushed that. He had a whole load of stuff in that area that he wanted to sign, and then he was behind the scenes. He was important, but I suppose when you get signed to a label and you want to release an album, they will come back with comments on the album and say, "Oh, we like this, we don't like this," and then you have to decide if you're going to go with what they say, or maybe you have to go with what they say. And then you.
What was it for you? Did you?
Well, I think
there
was some. Yeah, I think with the Zohar stuff, we kind of had an earlier album that we wanted to sort of re-update and then incorporate it with the newer tracks and make a sort of combined album. So that was sort of their idea, and then we went with that, and then then it's the usual label thing is they're not spending enough money promoting it, and you want them to put more time and effort into, because without you can have a product and no one's going to know about it unless there's some money promoting it, and it's still really the same. So the label really is important to get you out there. But that's what we hope. This was before the time of Instagram or any internet or anything. Yeah. So you can do more yourself now, but even so, money helps. So the label is really there. Theoretically, they're there to enable, what you're doing and help get you out there, either by helping you go on tour or pushing promotion. And it was nice. They did pay for us to master in Abbey Road and stuff like that, and that's great. It's all great, and actually there was one concert that Miles Copeland got us out to do in Bali, which was actually a world peace festival going out there, and it was on MTV Asia. It was 10,000 people. We had In Excess playing and a lot of bands from Australia, and then because in Bali there was a bomb as well many years ago, which blew up a lot of Australians. So it was a world peace music event which he was involved with, and he got us out there. And we, our band was perfect because we had an Arab singer, we were Jewish, and mixing up that music together. So that was, all that stuff is good. That would never happen without the label.
You don't strike me as someone who would be intimidated in a situation like that, but meeting someone of that profile and them showing interest in your band, and you'd obviously done some cool stuff prior to that as well, which we'll come to later. Did you have any kind of thoughts as to, if you were to advise a young musician who's meeting a record label boss for the first time, how to play it natural and how to not put too much weight on the meeting and the fear that you might miss out on something, at the same time as juggling the risk of being exploited in that situation as well, right? If you're too keen. So any thoughts on that from your experience?
I think it's hard not to get exploited to some extent, to be honest, if you're in the music business at some point in some way. So every interaction you have to judge what the potential is, where it's going, and none of us want to be in a situation where we're exploited. But every negotiation you have, how much you get paid for something, how much something is worth, is a potential exploitation or negotiation. And some things are, if they have a lot of potential, maybe worth getting a bit less, or from that. If we're talking about money here. We're talking about money exploitation. Obviously, everybody wants to get paid as much as possible for everything, but sometimes it just depends on each project. So every project is different, and from the record label, obviously they want to spend as least money as possible and get the maximum profit, and they're a business, so it makes sense. So it's a balancing out of those two things, and you hope that everybody's happy at the end, because ideally if they sign you for, they're happy with that deal and you're happy, and then you make them lots of money, then they're really happy, and obviously they're risking their money. So it's everything is a balance. But I think there is people coming up to you and saying, this is a good opportunity to do it for nothing. That's a different thing. That is exploitation, and we need to fight against that. And there are people that will do stuff just to get in there, but you should be paid. If you're taking yourself, if you're a professional person, you're taking yourself professionally, then you should be paid something for what your expertise. And where you go in that scale is obviously that's a negotiation.
So let's say someone tomorrow said, okay, Erran, there's going to be a film that we're making at the moment. It's likely to be a big hit in the next year. It's going to be shown all over the world.
They all say that, yeah.
Exactly, right. At what point do you then go, okay, this is my fee, or this is my percentage, or this is how much I will be paid for this? So is that at the beginning, or do you start working on it and then say, oh, just to shoot you an email, by the way, at what point does that happen in the process?
Yeah, I think you shouldn't really be working on it. I mean, another area where things are exploited is a lot of, pitching for things, which you have to do. It used to be paid to do pitches for a lot of things, and now that's not paid off, and can be a bit abusive, that whole sort of merry-go-round of that sort of putting in pictures. But I would say if there is a serious project, they actually want you, and if you firstly, do you like the project? If you like it, then it's really exciting to be involved with it. Then you convey that, and you should have a conversation before. Really, there should be a contract before you submit stuff, or certainly a sort of an agreement of some kind, because as we know, there's no real legal laws or rules. There should be, but there's no. Everything's on a sliding scale. How much you get, and what it could be a very low budget film, and everybody's doing a favor, and then you could be getting potential royalties on the back end if there is something, or maybe it's a good career thing because someone's that is you really wanted to work with. But you still should be there still should be something. If there's nothing, then, or there's no talk of that, it gets a bit worrying. And that's why people have agents, because theoretically they are meant to help have that conversation, but they also take money as well. for that.
What's the biggest lie or myth about the music industry that people need to stop believing?
That's a good question. Yeah. What's the biggest myth? I mean, what are people told that you can? I suppose you have to be realistic that we're doing it because we love it and we're obsessed, and it's a tough road. And I suppose some people's dream is you're going to just write a song or write a track or an album, and it's going to be a big hit, and you're going to be earning loads of money and be thrown all around the world in hotels. And the reality is, even the people that have actually had success in the pop world and in other worlds are not necessarily being flown around the world or even earning much money. Especially nowadays with streaming and everything else. To actually, there's artists who are selling a lot of or getting large numbers of streams and still hardly earning a minimum wage, as far as I understand. So there's a myth there. So again, you have to be, the way to get through that is to do lots of different things and be versatile, as I said, and be open to, in one way you have to pursue one path, and in other ways you have to be able to pursue related paths as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because there'll be loads of musicians listening to this who probably quit at some point in their career and just thought, no, I'm not making the living out of it, possibly out of maybe stubbornness. I include myself in that, around like, no, this is the artist I am, and that's it. But you're right. If you have a bit more adaptability, that's going to open avenues for you to do things later on. Have you ever thought about quitting music?
I think I did actually go through that point where I thought I'm going to give another 6 months, because I think at that point I had 2 kids, and things become more real when you have kids, and you have that responsibility, and you have to pay the bills, and you have to move, rent a bigger place, or try and buy a place, or you have all those bills that you're thinking about. It's one thing if you're by yourself, but once you have that situation, things get really real. So I think it was, there was a sort of moment where I was thinking, am I going to get to the point where I'm going to be able to support my family? And I was doing a lot of different things. I was doing teaching, I was doing stuff for media stuff, I was performing, I was doing my albums. And all that was adding up, but it was, it was still not enough at that point. So I think I did have those thoughts, and, somehow things started to move and started to do bigger things. And here I'm still doing it now. I don't know how sometimes, but I'm here.
And the key message throughout all of that is that you didn't quit, and then you went on to write a song that was shortlisted for the Oscars, right? So there is there's kind of a message within there. And actually, Smokey Robinson, he did an interview, and he said the one advice he'd give people is just to not give up. Like, just keep going. Eventually, you will get there. It's just a case, as you say, when you start having 2 kids and having to pay bills and stuff like that's the threshold where it gets really, really, tricky. So well done for kind of navigating your way through that. What sacrifices do you think you've made to get to where you are now? What have you missed out on, or what sacrifices have you made to get to where you are now?
Wow, these are all very interesting personal questions. I think the road to, if you do choose this road, especially getting into film composing, which is what I mainly do, one thing is you literally work alone for months on end on a project, and you almost have a cave-like existence. And even with my family, if it's a very intense project, I'll just say, can you pretend I don't live here? Because I'm not there day and night, and I'll come back and eat some food occasionally, but it's very intense, and you literally you don't see people or speak to people. I mean, you're in contact with a team, but it's kind of a very lonely path in some ways. That's one reason why I really like performing live and playing with my band, because that's the opposite. You're out in public, you're performing, and you're speaking to people, even if it's only 2 people who are in the audience. But no, normally there's more. But And what else have I sacrificed? Well, it's having the worry of having a steady income, because the way this business works is you can have a big project and then another project come straight after if you're lucky, but sometimes there's a gap, and sometimes that gap can go on a bit longer than you like. And it's that uncertainty, and you have to be ready for that. And that's tricky. So I suppose if you have a job, you get paid a wage. I mean, you could be sacked, I suppose. So that may not be, it could happen to anybody, but theoretically, you've got a job, you know you're going to be earning a certain amount in a year, and you can plan for that. So you
sacrifice your sense of security, financial security, in some ways. I mean, that's a really hard thing to navigate. And yes, these are personal questions, but actually, thank you for sharing those, because these are painting a true reality for young musicians going into the industry, such as the isolation. I've never considered that, but you're right. When you're doing these things, you're going to be sitting, on your own doing this potentially for hours, and
especially doing composing for for TV and film. You're literally that's particularly lonely kind of side to things. Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about the Wuhan Flu song. So obviously that appeared in the most recent film. Did you also write Throw the Jew Down the Well? And when I say that is an ironic use of that song title.
Yeah, there is a song called that.
Yeah, there is a song called that. But I think you need to see the context of that to understand it. Did you write that as well? Because that seemed to me to preempt Wuhan Flu a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't know. That one I did not write.
Right.
That was like a lot of stuff on my brother's projects. Things happened very quickly and very last minute, and I think they literally threw that together. One of his writers, a guy called Ant Hines, I think played a bit of guitar, so they quickly got that together and wrote the lyrics last minute. And I wasn't on that one, but I did.
But Wuhan Flu. The Wuhan Flu. So if you could talk us through that process, because I believe you said in the past that it was a very last minute thing. What was the process from the moment they go, okay, this is the key we want it in, perhaps, or this is the vibe that we want, to the point where it's recorded? Because I don't even think it was recorded in the studio at any point, right? The only recordings are from that live kind of take in the field. What's your memories of kind of getting that first call and saying, right, this is what we want, through to when that was performed live?
Yeah, so working with my brother, there's a certain sort of way it always seems to work, which is everything happens last minute and everything is needed very, very quickly. So on that particular song, similar to the other stuff and other songs I've written with him, they come up with the idea, his writing team writes some lyrics, I get sent that. They did tell me, it was all quite, when they're filming, it's also quite secret what they're doing, because obviously that was probably the most dangerous thing he's ever done, singing in a field of extreme right-wing Trump supporters who were brandishing machine guns and sort of pissing them off with this song. So it was kind of, I was thinking, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, this is completely nuts that he's going to do that. And I was thinking, thank God I'm only in the studio doing this, But it was a very brave song to perform, and it was going to be done live, and they only had one chance of doing it. So the idea behind the song was to create a sort of a sense for the people in there that there was something to sing along with very quickly, pick up, sing along, and before they know it, they're singing, about chopping up people and just seeing how far they could take, their involvement. That was the point, really. So I got a load of lyrics, and then I quickly put together, some ideas, and it goes backwards and forwards. I think we were doing that in the pandemic as well. So it was all lockdown. I was in this room actually, and the team were in America. So it was going backwards and forwards. There's a lot of backwards and forwards at that point to get things in place. And I was demoing versions. I think I did a lot of demos here of different versions, different options on the lyrics. I did about 15 versions of it, as far as I remember. And I was just singing. And then we had a band that was going to be playing live, and I was directing it from here. We had, stuff written out. And it was, as usual, quite a mad process, but with a great result, very thank God he got out alive, that was our thing in itself.
I mean, it's actually brilliant. I mean, let's be apolitical for the moment, but it's actually a brilliant song, regardless of what people, their stances on things. And actually, when I messaged a friend saying I was interviewing you, he's like, first message was like, that is an absolute banging tune. You just said there that, the idea is that people are going to sing along to it. Like every songwriter wants to sit down every time they write a song and go, oh, we want people to sing along to this, right? That isn't an easy thing to achieve. So what headspace did you get yourself into? Was there anything that was in your mind as you were writing it, thinking this will allow people to sing along? Is it a call and response, or is it a particular
there was a call and response. That was very important in the whole thing. That was the initial idea almost, get them to sing along in a call and response. Obviously, given where it was, the kind of audience was there, it was a kind of country like track, that was going to suit what people were into and the vibe. And then I just was aware that you just have to make it, you're obviously not going to do sort of weird Steely Dan complicated jazz chords, or it's going to be, from that point of view, musically simple. Like you say, doing something musically simple is sometimes not so easy to make it work, not sound just like a sort of weird karaoke, not interesting. It had to be interesting as well and sound good. Had to sound great, really. So that was what I had to work within. And again, working as a film composer, you had to just come up with the goods really quickly, and that's part of the reason why you just sort of day and night you're slaving away, and you have to come up with things last minute and then push it, and then you get feedback and you do it a different way, and that can go on for some time, but we didn't have much time on this one because they had this filming date.
Obama, what we gonna do? Inject him with the Wuhan flu. Inject him with the Wuhan flu. Let's hear it. Dr. Fauci, what we gonna do? Inject him with the Wuhan flu. Inject him with the Wuhan flu.
Well, you nailed it, and it was an important piece of music, actually, an important part of the film, which actually had quite a big influence on how things, I think, played out a little bit, and certainly how some people decided to vote.
Yeah, I mean, that was crazy when it was, got into this Oscar song race, because no one was thinking about that at all. And I suppose because it was such a political song, and it was a time when Trump was in power and the elections were there, the film really was done to sort of help a little bit with try and get Trump out of power, and show, what was going on in America, even if a couple of people would have affected, it was a success. And that was a big impetus to the whole film. So it was actually felt like you're working on something politically important, even though it was a funny comedy film and crazy at the same time.
I think that's very clear. It comes across as that. And in fact, I remember seeing at the end of it, there's bits that didn't make the edit because I think it was so recent, where like one of the characters is in the White House, and like Trump is only a few meters away and meets you never saw kind of any more of that. It's just kind of, that's how close to the election it was, that it didn't even get kind of fully edited, I don't think, it's to make the actual film. And it was kind of shown after. It was really interesting stuff. Is it true that you sung all 40 parts of the choir for the Kazakhstan national anthem in Air Studios?
Well, no, that's partly true. So what is true is I did sing all the parts. And what happened was, again, I think I sang it all in this room because there wasn't time to go to Air. So we recorded the score in Air Studios. So when we actually got to record with an orchestra, they were in Air Studios. And what happened in Air Studios is we didn't re-record it. We just used at the time, what I recorded here as the track. That became the track. So mainly right, apart from the there's a lot of truth in what you said, but not completely.
not fully. One of the things that's kind of synonymous with some of the stuff that you've done is like you're close to taking risks the whole time, I would say. And like you did the thing with Jarvis Cocker and Gaz Coombs on the Ali G show, where they were performing their own songs. So Gaz is doing a Supergrass song, Jarvis is doing a Pulp song, a really lovely ballad called Help the Aged, which is a very sweet song with a really nice sentiment. And then what happened? What did you tell the listeners what you did
research back in the day? So that was the Ali G show that was on Channel 4, and it was performed in front of a live audience. And the brief on that was these guys who were famous pop stars at the time, some of them still are, I think, were performing their song, and Ali G would be, he's a bit of a DJ type figure. So he would say, while they're performing like acoustically very nicely, he would just say, "Oh, bring in some bass," And so I had to create a backing track that would seamlessly merge with what they were doing live. I don't think we had a click track, but I'm just trying to think. We might have had some kind of click track. I was actually in the BBC studios when they performed it, and what I had to do was bring up the, on cue, bring up the ridiculous. So what there would be a lovely acoustic guitar playing, and suddenly some drum and bass sound would sort of invade the whole thing, but it would work. And then the drums would kick in. It would be a whole drum and bass, and it would end up turning into a sort of mad rave drum and bass track. And it all had to fit, and it would be on cue, which we didn't know when that would be exactly. So
did the artists know that was going to happen?
I don't think they know. They hadn't heard. They did. I don't know exactly what they knew. I don't think they knew much, as usual. In fact, none of us knew much. That was always exactly how it would pan out. We had no idea. All I knew was I had to pull up the fade. Actually, I remember I was really nervous because at the BBC they had the old, which they also have in Abbey Road. They have the faders that you have to pull down to put them on, not up. So you start at the top, and to make them loud, you bring it down instead of the. So I was quite nervous. I was going to just get it wrong because I was quite nervous about the whole thing anyway. And I had about 4 different tracks. I had to bring in bass, drums, weird sort of siren police sounds, and gun noises. And I had them all in different faders that I had to mix in with the track. And I was thinking, I just have to remember to do the opposite of what I'm used to do.
Cause one day we were just like you. Keep off the crack, keep off the crack. Help the aged. Respect your nan. Cause one day you'll be.
That was a lot of joy you brought to a lot of people on a Friday night on Channel 4. Let me tell you that. But did you do the backing track for when Mohammed Al Fayed got up and surprised everyone and started rapping?
You know what? I can't remember. I think I probably did. I did most of the music for those shows. So I can't remember what we did then. But we always had tracks that were we could bring up, and there was a lot of free form. A lot of it was very organised, but things were also on the hoof to some extent. So we had stuff ready to go.
Let's talk Philip Glass. That's quite a pivot.
Yes,
I know that's
not?
someone that. I know that Philip Glass is someone who, he influences a lot of people, doesn't he? But what do you think his approach has impacted you in your approach to writing? Do you think there's any kind of ripple effects from the work that he's done that's kind of embodied in you and the work that you create? And what would that look like?
That's quite a pivot, yeah. Well, Philip Glass definitely a big influence, and I remember when I was there was a film called Koyas Niskatsi, I think it's called, which was a film a long time ago, which was just incredible visuals about the world and sped up and slowed down, and about nature, and all a bit preemptive about global catastrophe, with just his music. And I saw that, and I heard that soundtrack, and there's the first track, Koy in his guts. He's got this incredible low voice singing that, and it was, although it's sort of in some ways very simple, it's just so powerful, and it definitely was a big influence. I remember even one of the questions I was asked when I was interviewed to get into my classical music courses was what contemporary composing, and I said Philip Glass, and the guy was really happy because he was a Philip Glass expert. I didn't realise, but he was. Yeah, so I think a lot of film music has been influenced by him. Even people like Hans Zimmer, and almost everyone has had. Plus, he's done a lot of great film music himself. Just that style is amazingly dramatic and just sets a mood, and it sort of flows. The way it flows, a bit like water, and speeds up, slows down, and it can create has a lot of emotional impact. And also it was because it was minimalism and it was not avant-garde, weird chords and noise. It was something that was kind of very accessible to a lot of people. And because the building blocks were simple, but you could create something very complex from it. So all those things were, I think they've probably affected the way I write music as well, along with everything else. But certainly he was, I think I first heard about him when I was about 14 or 15.
Hey, Stage Left listeners. This is Jez Wood from Beyond the Fail podcast, where I interview entrepreneurs and leaders to learn the secrets of failure and how businesses can bounce back. You can check us out by searching Beyond the Fail on any podcast platform. And a fun fact for regular listeners of Stage Left, that's me actually playing drums on the intro and outro music of the podcast, as I was in a band with Chris for over 15 years. And on the topic of Chris, did you know that he is one of only 2 people in the UK who can deliver mental health first aid training fully accessibly? That is to equip staff in businesses to know how to best help someone experiencing a mental health crisis. Would you like to know how to respond to someone who is at risk of taking their own life? Or how to respond to someone experiencing psychosis? Would you want to know how to ensure someone experiencing a panic attack gets the help they need from you in that moment? Well, you can hire Chris to run face-to-face or online training in your business to become fully qualified. Prices start from only $295 per head for 20 hours of learning. And for each person that signs up, the cost reduces the more people you book on. You even get a certificate. So do drop Chris an email at chris@thestageleftpodcast.com and he'll forward you on the details. Chris also offers one-to-one coaching, leadership development programs, and stress management courses, many of which are the areas he talks to some of the most prominent musicians here on the Stage Left podcast. So drop him an email at chris@thestageleftpodcast.com to connect and hear more details. So thanks for listening. Don't forget to search my podcast, Beyond the Fail, on all podcast platforms. Now, enough from me. Enjoy the rest of the episode as you were.
One thing I wanted to ask you about related to that, and you talked about the different times, we'll kind of talk about time signatures there as well. Obviously, with your world music influence that you kind of talked about, which Zohar attempted to achieve, and Miles Copeland liked a lot of, you must be able to write in lots of different time signatures, and that feel quite not natural, but just something that doesn't freak you out too much. And I speak to a lot of young musicians who are like beyond 3/4, right? So you get 4/4, fine. Beyond 3/4, it's a bit of a moment. Where did you learn to do that, like to write in different time signatures? Because that can be complex to people who are starting out as musicians.
When I did this jazz course with Ian Carr, this guy I mentioned before, we did have quite a lot of tracks in 5 and in 7. And when you see 5, you just think, that's really frightening. How do you play in 5? But that was actually formative influence, because not only did we know how to play in 5, we knew how to groove in 5 or in 7 or in 11. So there was a groove, and a lot of these grooves come from world music because they're tribal influences. Not all music is in 4, or even 3, and it's they're actually very natural time signatures once you get into them. So that was really important. I think it's just about playing stuff in that time signature and feeling the groove, feeling the rhythm. That was always important. And certainly when you do film music, you need to be changing signatures the whole time, because you are watching, everything you do goes with the picture, and it's not going to stay in 4/4 or 3 for the whole scene. There's going to be things where it's different time signature. That's slightly different. That may be because for dramatic purposes things take a bit longer, or things happen quicker, so the time signature changes briefly and then it moves into another thing. Or you're changing time signature because you want to change the mood subtly, or something else is happening that you're responding to. So that's the use of time signatures, but it's an important thing. And yet, certainly, we like 4/4, obviously, and 3/4 is quite good. But I like to put those two together, and then you get something more interesting.
And that must have helped you when you co-wrote the Infidel, or did the music for the Infidel with David Baddiel. I saw you had a song there called "Put a Fatwa on It." I'm sure Larry David must have heard of that, because there was a whole series of Curb where he does a musical called Fatwa. So that's kind of interesting.
Yes.
How challenging was that for you to then go from what you were doing to writing a musical? I mean, that's tough.
It's funny, all these different things I do, I don't really see them as different things. They're all the same in many ways, because really I'm writing music or I'm playing music, and it's in a different genre or different thing. And it is a different way of thinking. But really, there's a lot of, it all comes back to the root of it is music and what you do, what my take on it. So what is certainly different is with a musical is, film music, often you're at the end of the process and there's not enough time most of the time to actually do what you need to do, and you just have to do it anyway. And ideally you get a bit more time, and you are the picture and the story, everything comes from that, and you are there to enhance what's there, to increase the drama, the emotion, to sometimes do something that's not on the picture but it helps the film, so those are. But when you're writing a musical, music is important in a different way. There's no film, there's a drama, there's a book, there's a story, and then you work out what are the bits in the story where, I think David Baddiel, who I wrote it with, he said the moment where the words aren't enough to convey what you're saying, that's when the song starts, and the thing that can happen ideally with the musicals again is that because you've got the music and the words together, you get this, and the acting, the emotion is just increased, so much of whatever you're trying to convey, and that's the power of it. So it's a complete, in terms of the practical side of it, it's a completely different process, and a very long process. Film, you have to get it done in not enough time, and musicals, just to get it going, takes years.
Hi there, this is John Waff, the saxophonist with the 1975, and my favourite episode of the StageLeft Podcast has to be episode 49 with Bob Rounds. His anecdotes of working as a sideman alongside John Mayer are absolutely fascinating. Go and take a listen.
Jonathan Ross was once interviewing Quentin Tarantino and grilling him as to why he wouldn't use composers on his films. This was a few years ago before he started doing it more recently. And Tarantino he kept his cards very close to his chest, and fair play to Jonathan Ross, he kind of prodded him like 3 or 4 times. So eventually Tarantino says, because I don't want someone else to have more control over the film than myself, which is a very interesting kind of insight into how composers go about their business and the impact they can have. Do you feel you've ever written a piece of music that has reinterpreted how the director wanted that scene to go? And was it kept in?
Oh, it's never kept in. It's never kept in. Yeah, great question again. Well, it's true that when you get a scene, I mean, I'll just give an example. I did a film once about a true life murder, and the beginning was a kind of an encapsulation of the whole thing. So it was a young couple in love. They meet each other, fall in love. The next minute they're in bed having sex, I think, and and then things go wrong and she ends up killing him. I can't remember if something else happened in between those two things, but she gets jealous or something. Anyway, so on that was maybe a 5-minute or 4-minute piece that was just with music. There wasn't any dialogue, and one of the questions was, do you start with the beginning? It's all the images are, this is a young couple, quite attractive, in love. So how do you start? Do you start with, we know one person is psycho because she's going to kill the guy? Or do you start with this, we don't know this and they're in love? So there's that question. And, that, like I said, sometimes the music can tell you things that are not in the picture. So you can reinterpret, or another scene where someone's, well, just another thing, someone's having an argument with someone, and the music is going to be pointing to the emotion. Is it going to be the emotion of the person who's shouting or the person who is getting shouted at? And that completely changes the scene. And you can go for one or the other. Normally, you would have a discussion with the director about what they're thinking on each scene. But if they haven't got time to talk to you, which also happens, then you have to just go ahead and try and get it right. And sometimes you may be on a different page to the director and the producers, and then sometimes the producer might like it and the director hates it, and then you've got a whole argument between them to sort out. So that becomes more complicated. Really, you can sometimes you do stuff that you think really enhances the scene and it's really improved it, but it doesn't go in because not everyone will agree with you. So it's a process, and that's part of the process of being working as a team in that way.
If you found out tomorrow that a asteroid was hitting Earth, there's obviously going to be a lot of things on your mind. If you did allow yourself 10 seconds to think, I never got round to doing that musically, what do you think your biggest regret would be that you never got round to doing it musically if you found out that tomorrow the world was going to end?
Well, yeah, I think we should all try and work in that way. That we think we're going to. I think that's what. That's a good way to sort of motivate yourself to think you're going to die tomorrow.
There's someone called Hazel Mills who you might have heard of her. She's a keyboardist with Goldfrapp and done stuff with Future Utopia recently. On the podcast last year, I asked her that question, and it ended up triggering her. She cited it in the linear notes to do the kind of recording that she never got around to doing. So, what would yours be in that situation? What would be the thing you go, crumbs? I never got around to doing that. I kept putting off. I never got around to it.
Yeah, I think I would like to do more. I'm sort of a trumpet player at heart, although I play keyboards mainly and compose mainly. And maybe I'd like to do more. John Hassell was a big influence on me, the trumpet player, avant-garde trumpet player. I don't know if you know him, but incredible stuff to check out, like nothing else. He was quite influential on people like Brian Eno.
Oh, wow.
And it was almost a precursor to some of the stuff he was doing with Bowie and Talking Heads and stuff like that. In fact, he's on a Talking Heads album. And he made the trumpet sound like something you weren't sure what it was, which is also really interesting. But so I would love to do a project a bit like that and sort of noodle on my trumpet with sort of weird effects and create this otherworldly type project. I should just get on with it, actually, if the asteroid is coming. But,
what's stopping? What's stopping you now?
The problem is, as I said, I have 4 kids, and that's always been a factor. Like, how much time can I spend on a project without any idea if there's will be any? I mean, it's you do it for the love and for the passion, and I should just do it. But it's in the back of my mind that I'm thinking, will this earn any money or something, and sometimes it's hard to know that answers because sometimes things lead to other things. So just you should do these things, but maybe that's part of the reason. Obviously I obviously get projects where I am getting paid, and that takes priority, and then you end up not putting it on the back burner because it's a lower priority to stuff that is earning money.
So next time you get that gap you talked about between projects,
yes,
that's the time to crack on with it.
Exactly.
This is a question that I've asked a few people in the past, and actually we asked someone called Uncle Frank, who's the drummer in Fun Loving Criminals, who is in a band with his brother, and he put his head in his hands as I asked him, and he said that is a $64 million question. I don't think you're going to have the same response, because I think you probably nailed this, but how do you best compartmentalize being a brother from being an artistic collaborator? How do you make that work?
Yeah, Is that the $64 million dollar question or whatever you said?
Yeah.
Well, I've been working with Sasha, for most of my life, because, as I said, on the Friday nights when I used to have to play for my food, he would join in, and we used to write songs together, and it was just a bit of fun because we were bored actually with some of the people that were around the table, and all we were just sort of mucking around. So I would just play some chords and he would improvise some funny lyrics, and that was something we sort of got into. That was, actually we wrote a song called Schwitzen, which is Yiddish for sweating, about the religious guys who wear the black hats and the black coats and all these, but they wear it in the summer as well, and you start schwitzing, which means sweating in Yiddish. So he takes his coat off, he takes his hat off. At the end, it was quite, obviously because it's arsons, because my brother ended up being quite an extreme song, and he actually ends up taking all his clothes off and getting rid of his foreskin, or reattaching the foreskin, and then becoming Christian or something at the end. And actually, we used to play it in a comedy club in London, and there was a lot of media then. The BBC ended up filming us doing it and then banning it because we insulted 3 religions in 3 minutes. And but eventually it was shown somewhere. You can find it on the internet, some of it. Anyway, so we kind of collaborated naturally in the beginning, and then as things, then he got his Channel 4 thing. I was writing music for that, and then you're dealing with headlines, and then I end up in Hollywood with producers. And I remember on the Borat movie, and the first sort of big movie I'd worked on, where I'm in a room in LA with maybe 20 people there, maybe slightly less, maybe about 15 people, all from the studio, in my studio room, listening to the music with my brother there. And you just think, how did this happen? But we're still doing the same music that I did with the piano, really, and he was improvising the song, and just on a slightly higher level. And so it has many. The great thing is that because we have that connection and we've been doing it so long, he can say something to me about the music and I understand what he's saying. Because one of the big things composing music for film and when you talk to directors, is most people find it very hard to talk about music and what they want and what it means, and they can't really express it. So sometimes you have to interpret what they're saying. They say, make it faster but slower, make it more emotional but very, there's a lot of these things that sound like they're opposites, and you have to try and then write some music. But if he says something to me, I tend to understand what it is pretty quickly. So that's a shortcut. So that's a big advantage of having that relationship.
What about divorcing if you do disagree on something, or if everyone gets tension at work, right? Everyone gets tension with work colleagues, and then you throw into the mix the complexity of brother relationship, and brotherly relationships are complex. And there's plenty of examples of that where bands have split up or music hasn't been created as a result of this. There's so many examples through history. So is there anything you'd specifically say, other than the fact that you were close growing up, that has helped you navigate that in such a mature way?
I would say that I think everyone working on these big projects where everybody's working against time, there is a lot of tension and a lot of pressure, and that can be, that can be a factor in working with the whole team, because you can be slave. Certainly what I do is sometimes there's deadlines where you're working all night, and then you have to play the music in the morning too, and you're exhausted, and then sometimes you can play the music and there's silence or maybe not a good response, and that's difficult, for anyone to handle. So in that environment, I've been in that room where my brother's there and they're not necessarily liking what I'm doing, and but I think that would be the same for in any situation with anyone where you're pushing, doing your best, but things aren't going quite to plan at that point, and the pressure increases. So I think all film composers would be in that position. I don't think it's any different, and I think it's the way Sasha runs things. He doesn't treat me any differently as he would anyone else in his team, and he can't be seen to be doing that. And He certainly doesn't do it. Whether he actually treats me worse is another different question. But certainly there's no, if he loves it and the producer didn't like it, or some of the writers who were talking about it, then it's a discussion, it's no longer going to just go through. So I think from that point of view, it's the same position as it would be normally, which is just difficult, to be honest, on the whole. It can be great if things go well, but there's always some things come up in a big project.
Yeah. One project you were involved in with your brother was, it ended up that Bono, Sting, Snoop Dogg / Elton John and Chris Martin played on a song that you wrote.
Dove of Peace, yeah.
Dove of Peace at the end of Bruno, right? Did you tell us about that? Because it's quite a nice song, and it's got some. I noticed it's a really nice chord progression in it. And did you know that Elton John was going to go on to play that? And how did you? I guess the whole purpose of it was the charity single kind of thing, that comes out.
That's right.
Years. Did you when you sat down to write that? Did you have that chord progression already, or was it a case of what's something that's going to fit this? What's your memories of writing that?
Well, again, as it pretty much works the same way every time with Sasha's project, and that is they ring me up. I'm already working on music for the film. And they say, "Oh, we've had an idea. We need this big finale." That song was written to make peace in the Middle East, and they had a Israeli guy. I mean, it's very relevant for now with what's going on. And an Israeli guy, they had a Palestinian guy in a room from the Palestinian Authority, and they were kind of hating each other, but they agreed to be in the room together, which was great. And he was going to create world peace by bringing together, and then he would get them to sing the song Dove of Peace together. That was the idea, in a room. So the initial thing was that they were filming this tomorrow or within 2 days. Here's some lyrics. Can you write a song, like you said, like a charity type big thing? And we need it while we're filming, we need a backing track so that we can sing to. So get it all ready, immediately, kind of thing. And that was the process. Then I think partly because everybody loved the song so much, so they had it. There is a scene where they do sing it initially, but then they decided to make it a big ending to the film. And when it was written, no one had any idea, but they decided, it was the charity singles, and we had Bono, we had Sting, Snoop Dogg, Elton John, and who else did we have? Slash on guitar. So I was in the studio, just to add it, we were in a great studio. I think it was Westlake Studios in LA, which is a legendary studio there. And I suppose I was producing the session with all these guys there. And Slash was in, upstairs, and Elton John was coming in, and it was all. It sounds great, but of course, it was just to add to the tension and chaos. They were filming the movie at the same time, so actually, in the recording where they were recording, there was 40 people. The film crew were there, and the director was there. So actually, everything went from the director cut. I couldn't say, as I would normally in a recording session, "That's great, that line, can we just do this bit again?" And there was no overdubs. I had to wait for the cut or go, and then we had to just get what we could get. That was, and then it was be produced later. So and also it was things like we had Slash. We had they were taking time to warm up Elton John and stuff like that, and getting them. We had to get him out because we had Slash coming in to do his guitar stuff, and then Snoop Dogg was coming in with his. He has a bouncer called Tiny, who was the size of a door, like a big door. Who walked in, and it was all like. And Snoop did an amazing rap that I don't know, he improvised it, and it was basically he knew the song was Dove of Peace, so he did this incredible un-Snoop like rap about peace and love, about coming together, and it was beautiful. It was, I don't know if I was crying, but it was amazingly emotional. And then it was just completely wrong, because Snoop was there to do his, I'm going to put a gun to your mouth, to say it to be Snoop, So I think Sasha had to say, "Could you just do it again, but more Snoop?" Which is quite a thing to say to Snoop. So like all these things, incredible, but also incredibly tense, and we weren't sure what we were going to come out with. And I think the whole song the whole process, we had about an 8-minute song that then got reduced to what it became on the film.
Amazing.
Because we had everybody did a verse, and then we just chose the funniest verses. That was how the song got together. What's the funniest lines and which bits work from the comedy? Everything's about, doing a comedy film. That is always the number one point. What is making people laugh?
Peace. Either we're gonna have peace or we're gonna have motherfucking war. I have a dream for the third world. Clean water, food and teaching.
In every village and every town, a place for anal bleaching.
What underrated skill do you think every person needs to do well in the music industry? So I don't necessarily mean technical skill about the instrument. What do you think is a necessary kind of underrated skill or quality musicians need to really help themselves make a career in the music industry?
I wish I knew. Yeah. I think a good skill is networking and being able to get on with people and not be grumpy because there's a lot of, I've worked on these big projects, which are amazing, but actually they're very hard to get through them and emotionally hard because you are pushing yourself and things don't always go the way you want. So you have to be ready to, I suppose maybe the number one thing is humility not having an ego, because I think people who just have an ego without the talent or without the humility no one really want to work with those people necessarily long term, because it's just a pain, and I think being part of it depends, especially what I do in the film music, and you are part of the process, a very important part, but part of it to make what you're making the best thing possible. And I think having humility is really important, and being able to be part of a team goes a long way. Even if it's your project, I think you have to be able to take criticism as well, from people who you respect. I think that's an important thing. If you can take it, no matter how hard that may be, I think that's part of being able to make it. Actually,
what's next for you?
I am. Well, my brother does have a film. It's been postponed because of the strikes going on. So we probably would have been beginning to work on it quite soon. And
can you tell us what it is, or is it top secret?
I wish I knew the answer to that one as well, but I don't get told much. So yeah, it's all pretty secret and all quite early. But I think they're meant to be doing it once the strike is resolved. So hopefully
300 years.
I'll be on that sort of next year at some point. And then I just did some music for the Royal Shakespeare Company with a production of The Merchant of Venice, which was a really interesting project. And I'm doing quite a lot of live playing in London. I am doing a bit of trumpet noodling in Soho occasionally. And then I'm playing in a place called the Camden Club in Camden with my band. I'm doing a little EP of it's actually quite Steely Dan, Tom Misch type jazz, poppy type stuff, if that makes any sense. So I'm just working on an EP, which will hopefully be coming out towards the end of this year, I hope. So yeah, just keeping my finger in the pie, I think. Is that the right phrase? I'm not sure.
It's one of them. Lovely. Yeah. Thank you. The last thing I'm going to share with you, because it involves someone, and I think it's a great story. It involves someone that you would have worked with a lot, and I don't know if they know it, so it'd be great if you could pass on this. So I was interviewing a guy called Gem Archer, who is the lead guitarist in Oasis for 10 years, round his house a few years ago. And he had this guitar called a Gibson Firebird, which is very kind of iconic at that time, because it was his kind of lead guitar that he played on kind of a few of their records, and it played Wembley Stadium. He let me play it, which was fantastic. And it was in the video for a song called Go Let It Out, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked him, where did you get it from? And he said, I bought it from a pawn shop, a second-hand shop. And he found out later it was owned by Dan, is it Mazza or Mazer? Which I think is Dan Mazer, which is a collaborator, I think, with yourselves for years. And I don't even think that Dan knows that guitar that he sold has ended up playing Madison Square Garden, Wembley Stadium, literally has toured the whole world. Yeah, it's an absolutely amazing coincidence, I think. And maybe you could pass that on at some point if you ever see Dan in future, because I don't even think he knows that, which is cool. Listen, I want to say thank you for your time, for your wisdom, for your reflections on the last hour or so. You've worked on movies that genuinely, I think, shone a spotlight on corruption, misogyny, racism of the most powerful people in the world, and the ripple effect of those has changed the world for the better. And hopefully that's going to continue with future projects you work on. Keep it up and ensure that in those gaps you do end up recording that avant-garde jazz trumpet album that you talked about, and then you can come back on and tell us how you got on. And listen, it's been really, really interesting stuff, and thanks for sharing so much, and thanks for being such a great guest on the StageLeft Podcast.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
For more episodes featuring comedian Stuart Lee, Tony Visconti, Gem Archer of Oasis, David Bowie bassist Gail Ann Dorsey, Queen's musical director Spike Edney, The Police manager Miles Copeland III, Kate Nash, Ian Brody, Stormzy producer Fraser T. Smith, Katie Cole of the Smashing Pumpkins, Clive Deemer of Radiohead, and Richard Fortas of Guns N' Roses, go to thestageleftpodcast.com and drop us a DM on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter to let us know what your biggest takeaway was from each interview. Search the Stage Left Pod and you'll find us.